Isabella, a resilient woman in her mid-30s, has spent years silently enduring her family's perpetual exploitation. Living under the shadow of parental favoritism and her narcissistic mother's demands, she manages the home, garden, pets, and the family business without pay, while her golden child sister receives praise and payment for minimal contributions. The mantra, "family works for free," has masked systematic exploitation, costing Isabella her career advancements, studies, and personal life. Years of resentment simmer, threatening to boil over as her personal ambitions fade. The breaking point arrives when her mother unilaterally expects Isabella to house sit for another expensive vacation. For the first time, Isabella refuses, demanding justice and recognition for her sacrifices. The explosive confrontation leads to Isabella packing her bags for a permanent departure, choosing absence to reveal the true cost of her unpaid labor. She embarks on a journey of self-discovery and liberation, building a new life and pursuing deferred dreams. Meanwhile, her mother faces chaos as the family business falters and the household crumbles without Isabella. The sister's unreliability further highlights the consequences of favoritism. Isabella finds peace and strength, forging new boundaries and reclaiming her self-worth, making The Unpaid Dues a powerful narrative of breaking free from generational manipulation and finding true freedom. The alarm clock didn't have the chance to ring. My internal clock, honed by 2 decades of anxiety and obligation, snapped my eyes open at 5:15 a.m. The room was dark, the air stale with the scent of old lavender sachets I had sewn myself 3 years ago, one of the 1,000 minor tasks that made up the fabric of this house, invisible to everyone but me. I lay there for a moment, listening to the silence of the sprawling Victorian house my parents called home. It was a beautiful beast of a property, all creaking mahogany floors and high demanding ceilings. To the outside world, it was the Miller estate, a pillar of the community and a testament to my mother's business acumen. To me, it was a mouth that never stopped eating my time. Throwing off the duvet, I shivered. The heating was kept low to save money, a rule that applied strictly to the night hours and my wing of the house, though I knew for a fact the radiator in my sister Elena S. room was currently hissing with warmth. I pulled on my worn fleece robe, the texture rough against my skin, and padded downstairs. The kitchen was a cavern of stainless steel and marble, cold to the touch. The routine was muscle memory. Grind the beans, medium coarse, Colombian roast. Feed the 2 Dobermans who were already whining at the back door, and empty the dishwasher before Mother came down at 7 a.m. As I measured the coffee grounds, the smell usually brought me comfort, but today it just smelled like service. I looked at my hands. They were dry, the cuticles ragged, mid-30s. I was 35 years old, and my hands looked like they belonged to a woman of 50. I had a degree in logistics and supply chain management gathering dust in a drawer somewhere, a relic of the life I had tried to start before family duty clawed me back. "Good boys," I whispered to the dogs Zeus and Apollo as I set their heavy bowls down. They ate voraciously, ignorant of the cost of their high-protein kibble. I wiped their drool from the floor immediately. Mother couldn't stand the sight of a mess, even if she loved the idea of having guard dogs. By 6:30, I was in the home office. This was my second shift. The first was domestic. The second was corporate. The family business, Miller Event Planning, was entering its busy season. Weddings, corporate retreats, high-end charity galas. I booted up the desktop, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. The inbox was already flooding. Vendor disputes, floral shortages, catering changes. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. I resolved a pricing conflict with the tent rental company, rescheduled a flaky photographer for the Henderson wedding, and double-checked the payroll for our contract staff. Then I opened the internal ledger. It was a masochistic ritual I performed once a month. There it was, Elena Miller, Social media coordination, $200. Below it, another entry. Elena Miller, client consultation bonus, $500. Elena had posted 3 photos on Instagram last week. I knew this because I had taken the photos, edited them, and written the captions. She had simply pressed share from her iPhone while lounging by the pool. My line in the ledger didn't exist. There was no Isabella Miller. My compensation was room and board, a roof over my head in a house I cleaned, and food from a fridge I stocked. Family works for free, Mother always said. We build this legacy together. But only one of us was building, and only the others were inheriting the glory. The heavy thud of footsteps upstairs broke my concentration. The house was waking up. I quickly minimized the ledger. Looking at it felt like a transgression, a betrayal of the loyalty I was supposed to feel, and brought up the schedule for the day. Isabella? The voice drifted down the stairs, sharp and impatient. Isabella, the coffee pot is blinking. Did you not fill the reservoir? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, pushing the simmering heat in my chest back down into the pit of my stomach where it lived. Coming, Mother. It just needs a reset. I walked into the kitchen to find Victoria Miller standing by the island. She was 60, but looked 45, thanks to expensive creams and regular retreats that I managed the bookings for. She was wearing a silk kimono, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the granite counter. It's not working, she said, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on her tablet. And we have the walkthrough with the frantic bride at 10. I need caffeine. It's working, Mother, I said, walking over and pressing the brew button she had missed. The machine gurgled to life. You just have to press the start button firmly. Well, it shouldn't be so temperamental. We should buy a new one. Put it on the list. She finally looked up, her gaze scanning me critically. You look tired, Isabella. Those bags under your eyes are dreadful. You really should drink more water. It reflects poorly on the business when you look haggard during meetings. I've been up since 5 handling the vendor contracts for the charity gala, I said, my voice flat. The tent guy was trying to upcharge us 15%. And? She poured the coffee into her favorite mug. That's just administration. It's hardly digging ditches. Did you see what Elena did with the branding colors? She suggested we switch to dusty rose instead of blush. It's going to be revolutionary for the spring campaign. I saw, I said, turning back to the sink to start washing the pans I did use to make her poached eggs. I'm the one who sent the hex codes to the printer. Yes, but the vision, Isabella? That's what clients pay for. The vision. She took a sip, sighing with satisfaction. Where is your sister? She needs to be up. She has that hair appointment at 11. Asleep, I said. She came in late. She's networking, Mother corrected, her tone defensive. Building relationships, that's how we get clients. You could learn a thing or two from her social grace instead of hiding behind that computer screen all day. I gripped the sponge so hard water streamed over my knuckles. Hiding. I was the engine. I was the fuel. I was the mechanic. They were the hood ornament. The day proceeded in a blur of thankless motion. I vacuumed the living room rugs. Persian. Delicate. Requiring the hand vacuum attachment. I fielded a screaming match between a caterer and a venue manager over a lack of electrical outlets. I drove into town to pick up the dry cleaning. Mother S. power suits and Elena S. party dresses. By late afternoon, I was in the garden. It was my only sanctuary, though even this was labor. I was deadheading the roses, the thorns snagging my gloves. The late afternoon sun was golden, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Bella! Eleanor's voice chirped from the patio. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a glass of iced tea. Tea I had brewed and placed in the pitcher an hour ago. She looked radiant, rested, and utterly useless. Hey, I said, not stopping my pruning. Snipping the dead weight off the bushes felt therapeutic. Mom's asking for you. We're having a strategy meeting in the dining room. Also, my car is making a weird noise. Can you take it to the mechanic tomorrow? I have 3 client consultations tomorrow, Elena, and the tax prep. She pouted, a practiced expression that softened hearts and opened wallets. Please, I get so anxious dealing with those mechanics. They always try to rip me off. You're so good at being, firm. Scary even. Scary, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. I'm not scary, Elena. I'm competent. Same thing. Just come inside. Mom's opening a bottle of wine. She has news. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist, leaving a streak of dirt. I looked at the garden, at the orderly rows of hydrangeas I had planted, at the house that loomed over me. I felt a sudden, crushing fatigue. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers that nothing will ever change. I stripped off my gloves and followed her inside. The dining room was set for a meeting, which meant wine glasses and a charcuterie board I hadn't prepared, which was surprising. Mother was seated at the head of the table, looking unusually buoyant. Sit, sit! Mother gestured to the chair on her left. Elena took the right. Isabella, wash your hands first, please. You smell like mulch. I went to the powder room, scrubbed my hands raw with lemon soap, and returned. I sat down, keeping my spine straight, bracing myself. Usually, these meetings were about budget cuts. Specifically, cuts to household expenses that made my job harder. So, Mother began, swirling her Chardonnay. We've had a fantastic quarter. The Henderson wedding deposit cleared, and the charity gala is practically sold out. Thanks to the social media push, Elena added, picking at a grape. Exactly, Mother beamed at her, and because we've been working so hard, I've decided we need to recharge. The brand needs fresh inspiration. We can't pour from an empty cup, as they say. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Who is we? Mother pulled a glossy brochure from under her notebook and slid it across the mahogany table. It was a picture of a cruise ship. Not just any ship, a luxury liner that toured the Mediterranean. To the Aegean Odyssey, Mother announced, her eyes glittering. 3 weeks. Italy, Greece, Turkey. First class. Elena and I have been talking about it for weeks, and I finally booked it this morning. We leave on Tuesday. Tuesday. That was 4 days away. Tuesday? I stared at the brochure. The blue water on the cover mocked me. Mom, we have the chaotic Thompson wedding next weekend. The charity gala is the week after. We have payroll due on the 15th. I know. Mother waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. That's why you're staying. The air left the room. The silence that followed was so loud it rang in my ears. Excuse me, I whispered. Someone has to man the fort, Isabella, Mother said, her tone shifting from excitement to that reasonable lecturing voice she used when I was a child. You know the operations better than anyone. You can handle the Thompson bride. She likes you. You're good at the drudgery. Drudgery, I repeated. And besides, Elena chimed in, leaning forward, we're going to be doing market research. We're going to look at destination wedding venues in Santorini. It's practically a business trip. A business trip, I said, my gaze shifting between them. For 3 weeks. It's going to be so much work, Elena sighed dramatically. All that walking, taking photos. Isabella, don't look so sour, Mother snapped, sensing the change in my atmosphere. You hate traveling. You always complain about the crowds and the heat. You're a homebody. You love the house. I'm doing you a favor, really. You'll have the whole place to yourself. Some peace and quiet. Peace and quiet, I said, my voice trembling slightly. To manage the business. To take care of the dogs. To maintain the garden. To handle the clients. Alone. You're not alone. You have the contractors, Mother said, taking a sip of wine. Look, it's already paid for. It's non-refundable. And I need you to drive us to the airport on Tuesday morning at 4 a.m. Our flight is early. She didn't ask. She never asked. It was a decree from the throne. I looked at the two of them. My mother, with her unlined face and expectation of servitude. My sister, with her soft hands and unearned rewards. They looked like a matching set, a portrait of leisure painted on the canvas of my labor. For years, I had told myself it was temporary. Just until the business stabilizes, just until Mom's health is better, just until Elena finds her footing. But the business was stable. Mom was healthier than I was. Elena was 30 years old. You booked it without asking me if I could cover it, I said. It wasn't a question. Why would I ask? Mother laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You're always here, Isabella. Where else would you be? The word struck me like a physical blow. Where else would you be? She was right. I had made myself into furniture. I was as constant and overlooked as the lamp in the corner. I had no life outside of them because they had consumed it all. I had no money to leave because I worked for free. I had no friends to call because I never had time to see them. I need a list of everything that needs to be done while we're gone, Mother continued, oblivious to the cracking sound of my composure. And make sure you water the orchids in the sunroom. Last time I went to the Hamptons, you let the white one wilt. I was running the office single-handedly while you were in the Hamptons, I said, my voice barely audible. Excuses don't bring back blooms, Isabella, she said coldly. She stood up, smoothing her silk skirt. We're going to start packing. I need you to bring up the vintage Louis Vuitton trunks from the basement. They're heavy, so be careful with your back. She turned to Eleanor. Come, darling. Let's decide which evening gowns to bring. They walked out of the room, their chatter fading as they ascended the stairs. I sat alone at the long mahogany table. The glossy brochure lay before me. The Aegean Odyssey. I looked at my hands again. The dirt from the garden was still under my fingernails. I thought about the basement. I thought about the heavy trunks. I thought about the 3 weeks of hell that awaited me, the screaming brides, the unpaid invoices, the leaking faucets, the silence of this house that was not a home but a prison I had helped build. Where else would you be? I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. A harsh sound in the quiet room. I didn't go to the basement. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I had planted. The sun had set, and the world was turning grey. A strange sensation was rising in my chest. Not the familiar burn of resentment, but something colder, something harder. It was the feeling of a contract expiring. I turned away from the window and looked at the stairs where they had disappeared. I could hear them laughing above me. The trunks, Isabella! Mother's voice floated down, muffled by the floorboards. Don't dally! I took a breath. The air tasted different. It tasted like the moment before a storm breaks. I walked past the basement door. I walked past the office. I walked straight up the stairs, past their rooms and into my own. I pulled my suitcase from the top of my closet. It was dusty. I hadn't used it in 6 years. I unzipped it, the sound loud and final in the small room. Where else would you be? Anywhere, I whispered to the empty room. Anywhere but here. The silence that followed my mother's decree was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the static of 1,000 unvoiced grievances. The word naturally. She expected me to naturally handle the estate, the dogs, the leaky conservatory roof, and the unending cascade of business emails while she sipped Prosecco in the Amalfi Coast, vibrated in the air like a struck gong. My hands were in the sink, submerged in soapy water that had gone lukewarm. I watched a cluster of bubbles pop one by one, disappearing into nothingness. It was a perfect metaphor for my 30s. Isabella, did you hear me? Her voice was sharp, a manicured nail tapping against glass. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through flight options on her tablet, already mentally checked out of the home she ruled with an iron whimsy. I turned off the tap. The sudden cessation of running water made the kitchen aggressively quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird realizing the cage door had been left unlatched. "No," I said. The word didn't sound like mine. It was rough, foreign, scraped from the bottom of a throat that had swallowed pride for 2 decades. My mother, Elena, didn't look up from her screen. A small, indulgent smile played on her lips, the kind one offers a confused toddler. "Don't be dramatic, darling. It's only 3 weeks. Besides, Chloe is too busy with her influencing career to house sit. And you know how the kennels stress the corgis." I didn't say it was dramatic, I said, my voice gaining a terrifying steadiness. I turned to face her, wiping my wet hands on a rag until the skin burned. I said no. "I'm not doing it." Finally, she looked up. Her eyes, a piercing shade of icy blue that I had, unfortunately inherited, narrowed slightly. The air temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Excuse me? I am not house-sitting. I am not running the business while you are gone. I am not managing the gardeners." I took a step forward, the rag bunched in my fist. "I am done." She laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor. "You're done? What does that even mean?" "You live here, Isabella. This is your contribution. Family helps family." "Family helps family?" I repeated, the irony tasting like bile. "Chloe gets a salary for posting 3 photos a week on the company Instagram. Dad pays for her apartment in the city. Meanwhile, I run the logistics, the accounting, and the household maintenance, and I have to ask you for gas money to drive to the grocery store to buy your food." Eleanor slammed her hand onto the marble countertop. The sound cracked through the tension like a whip. "How dare you count pennies with me after everything we've provided? A roof over your head? A safe environment?" "A cage," I corrected her. "You've provided a cage. I'm 36 years old, Mother. I have a Master Abayas degree gathering dust in a drawer. Because you needed me. During the transition, that was 6 years ago. The transition never ended." "You're being hysterical," she sneered, falling back on her favorite weapon. If she could paint me as unstable, she didn't have to listen to me. She stood up, smoothing her silk blouse, looming over the space I occupied. "You have no expenses. You have no responsibilities outside of this house. You should be grateful we allow you to stay here without rent." "I pay rent with my life!" I screamed. The explosion shocked us both. The sound bounced off the copper pans hanging from the ceiling, echoing the rage I had stored in the marrow of my bones. "I pay rent with every hour I spend fixing your mistakes, covering for Chloe, and listening to you tell me I'm ungrateful. I have no savings, no pension, no life, because you told me the business couldn't afford to pay me yet." "But it can afford Amalfi. It can afford Chloe's new car." Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of cold porcelain. She walked around the island, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive lilies and condescension. "If you are so unhappy, Isabella, then what is stopping you? You think the world out there cares about a middle-aged woman with a 6-year gap on her resume? You think you can just walk out and become something?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You are nothing without us. You are the help. And the help doesn't dictate terms." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a precise surgical strike aimed at the insecurities she had carefully cultivated in me since childhood. But strangely, instead of the usual crushing weight of shame, I felt a sudden, buoyant lightness. The tether snapped. "You're right," I whispered back. Eleanor smirked, triumph returning to her eyes. She thought I was capitulating. She thought the no was over. "I am nothing here," I continued, my voice gaining volume, "which is why I can't stay." I threw the wet rag onto the counter. It landed with a wet thud right next to her tablet. I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen. "Isabella, get back here. I haven't dismissed you." Her voice shrilled behind me, rising in pitch as she realized I was walking toward the stairs, not the pantry. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my legs fueled by adrenaline. I burst into my bedroom. The same room I had slept in since I was 10, preserved in a state of arrested development. I didn't look at the posters I'd been meaning to take down, or the desk piled high with the invoices I was supposed to process that afternoon. I dragged my suitcase from the top of the wardrobe. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight, hitting the carpet. I threw the case onto the bed and unzipped it. The sound was the loudest thing in the world. Z-z-zip. The sound of opening. The sound of closing. I didn't pack logically. I packed like a refugee fleeing a war zone. Underwear, socks, jeans, 2 sweaters. I went to the bookshelf and grabbed my journals. The only record that I existed as a person and not just a function. I grabbed my passport, which had expired 2 years ago, a stark reminder of the trips I'd cancelled to handle her crises. I grabbed the small wooden box containing my grandmother's necklace. The only thing of value I owned that Elena hadn't purchased. Downstairs, I heard the rapid clip-clop of Elena's heels on the hardwood. She appeared in my doorway, breathless, her face flushed a blotchy red. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm leaving, Mother." I didn't look at her. I was folding a silk scarf, focusing on the texture of the fabric, the way it slipped through my trembling fingers. "You can't leave. The audit is next week. The gala is on the 20th. Who is going to coordinate the caterers?" Her narcissism was a force of nature. Even now, facing the loss of her daughter, she could only see the loss of a service provider. "I'm sure Chloe can handle it," I said, shoving a toiletry bag into the corner of the suitcase. "She's very creative, isn't she? That's what you always say." "Chloe is a child," Elena shrieked. "She can't run a household." "Then you'll have to learn," I said, snapping the elastic straps over my clothes. I zipped the bag shut. It looked pathetic. 36 years of life compressed into 22 inches of polyester. But it was mine. I hoisted the bag off the bed. It was heavy, but the weight felt good. It felt like an anchor I could use to smash through a glass wall. "If you walk out that door," Elena hissed, blocking my path, her arms crossed, "don't you dare think you can come crawling back when you run out of money. I will change the locks, Isabella. I will cut you off completely." I stopped inches from her. I looked at the woman who had given me life and then slowly, methodically, consumed it. I looked at the fine lines around her mouth, the frantic fear in her eyes that she tried to mask with aggression. For the first time, I didn't see a giant. I saw a small, terrified woman who couldn't operate a washing machine. "You already cut me off, Mother," I said softly. "You cut me off from the world years ago. I'm just making it official." I didn't push past her. I simply stepped around her. She was so stunned by the lack of engagement, the refusal to participate in the screaming match she craved, that she didn't move. I walked down the hallway, the wheels of my suitcase rumbling over the floorboards like distant thunder. The house was filled with ghosts. The ghost of the career I almost had, the ghost of the fiancé I let go because family came first, the ghost of the girl who thought if she just worked hard enough, she'd be loved. I reached the front door. My hand hovered over the brass handle. It was cool to the touch. "Isabella!" Elena shouted from the top of the stairs. "You are making a massive mistake. You will fail out there." I opened the door. The air outside was crisp, smelling of damp earth and freedom. It was terrifying. I had no job. I had $300 in cash stashed in a sock. I had nowhere to go. But as I stepped over the threshold, the crushing weight on my chest vanished. "Watch me," I whispered to the wind. I pulled the door shut behind me. The latch clicked, a final definitive period at the end of a very long sentence. I walked toward my beat-up sedan, threw the suitcase in the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. As I drove down the long gravel driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror only once. The house stood grand and imposing, a monument to appearance over substance. I turned onto the main road and didn't look back again. The road ahead was blurry through my tears. But for the first time in years, The steering wheel was in my hands. The gravel of the driveway didn't just crunch under my tires. It sounded like bones breaking, a final, irrevocable snapping of the tether that had bound me to that house for 3 decades. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the sprawling colonial facade, or worse, my mother's silhouette in the doorway, arms crossed, face contorted in that familiar mask of martyred fury, I knew my foot would falter on the gas pedal. So I stared straight ahead, my knuckles bleached white against the steering wheel, driving until the manicured lawns of our affluent suburb dissolved into the erratic, grittier texture of the city outskirts. My heart wasn't beating. It was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. It was a terrifying rhythm. For years, my pulse had been dictated by her moods. Thump-thump for a passive-aggressive comment. Race for a full-blown tirade. But this was the rhythm of a free-fall. I pulled into the parking lot of the Vista View Apartments, a name that was purely aspirational. The building was a beige stucco block that smelled of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. It was the only place I could secure on short notice, with the meager savings ID scraped together from birthday money and selling old clothes. Secret funds hidden away like contraband. Dragging my 2 suitcases up the external stairwell, I felt a phantom weight on my back. It was the physical sensation of guilt, heavy and suffocating. Who will feed the dogs? The thought intruded, unbidden. Who will prep the invoices for the Monday morning supplier run? Who will make sure Dad takes his blood pressure meds? I unlocked door 2B and stepped inside. The apartment was small. A studio, really. The carpet was a flat, industrial grey that had seen better decades, and the air held the faint, chemical tang of lemon furniture polish masking the scent of stale cigarettes. It was hideous. It was beautiful. It was mine. I dropped my bags in the center of the room and just stood there. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. In the family home, silence was a weapon, a precursor to an explosion, or the icy treatment given as punishment. Here, silence was just the absence of noise. It felt thick, pressing against my ears. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest. My phone, which I had silenced an hour ago, was vibrating incessantly on the nightstand. It buzzed against the cheap veneer wood like an angry hornet. I picked it up. 42 notifications, 17 missed calls from Mother, 6 from Dad, 3 from my sister Chloe, and a barrage of text messages that scrolled endlessly. Where do you think you're going? The landscapers are here. They need the check. You are being incredibly selfish, Isabella. Pick up the phone now. Dad can't find the login for the bank account. I watched the screen light up again. Incoming call, Mother. My thumb hovered over the decline button. My conditioning kicked in. The Pavlovian urge to answer, to apologize, to smooth things over, to fix the problem so the yelling would stop. I could almost hear her voice in my head, sharp as a glass shard. Family doesn't walk out on family, Isabella. We sacrifice. I let it ring and ring and ring until it went to voicemail. Then I turned the phone off completely. The first night was a battle against my own internal clock. At 6 p.m., I instinctively stood up to start dinner. My body was ready to chop vegetables, to marinate chicken, to set the table with the precise placement of silverware that Mother demanded. I stood in the middle of my tiny kitchenette, holding a box of crackers, confused by the lack of demand. There was no one to serve. I ate crackers and cheese sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. It was a pathetic feast, yet it tasted better than any gourmet roast I had ever cooked under duress. But the anxiety wouldn't leave. I kept waiting for the door to burst open. I kept waiting for the police to arrive, sent by a mother who viewed my departure not as an adult moving out, but as a piece of property being stolen. 3 days passed in a haze of disorientation. I felt like a deep-sea diver brought to the surface too quickly. The bends, emotional decompression sickness. I finally turned my phone back on the third evening. The deluge was instantaneous. The voicemails were a chronological documentation of the household's collapse. I pressed play on the speakerphone, setting the device on the counter as I brewed a cup of cheap tea. Beep. Isabella. Mother's voice was icy, controlled. This tantrum has gone on long enough. You've made your point. Come home before dinner. The gardeners are coming over and I need you to prep the hors d'oeuvres. Beep. The dog has thrown up on the Persian rug. Mother again, 2 hours later. The control was slipping. I don't know what you fed him before you left, but this is your mess. Chloe tried to clean it and made it worse. Get back here. I took a sip of tea. I hadn't fed the dog anything unusual. He had a sensitive stomach that required a specific mix of wet and dry food, a ratio I had perfected over years. Mother likely just dumped whatever was in the can into his bowl. Beep. Where are the files for the Johnson account? This was Dad. He sounded bewildered like a child lost in a supermarket. I'm at the office. The filing cabinet is a disaster. You said you organized it by date, but I can't find anything. The client is waiting, Isabella. This is embarrassing. I closed my eyes, visualizing the office. The files were color-coded and alphabetized within the dates. I had created the system. I had explained the system. I had written a manual for the system that sat right on top of the desk. They had simply never bothered to look because they never had to. I was the living, breathing search engine. Beep. This one was from Chloe, my golden sister, the one who got the salary, the praise, and the credit. Easy? Seriously? Mom is freaking out. She's making me call the suppliers. I don't know who supplies the linens. That's your job. You need to tell me the password for the vendor portal right now. I have a nail appointment in an hour and I can't be dealing with this crap. I laughed. It was a dry, rusty sound. That's your job, she had said. The job I wasn't paid for. The job she was technically the manager of on paper. The final message was from late last night. It was Mother again, but the ice was gone, replaced by a seething, chaotic heat. You ungrateful little wretch. The florist didn't deliver for the charity gala because the invoice wasn't paid. I told them my daughter handles the accounts and they laughed at me. Do you know how much humiliation I endured today because of your selfishness? The house is a wreck. The business is stalling. If you think this little stunt will get you a raise, you are mistaken. You are destroying this family. I deleted the message. I was destroying the family? No, I had simply stopped being the glue that held their incompetence together. I walked to the single window of my apartment. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on, illuminating the cracked pavement below. It wasn't the view of the sprawling garden I was used to. There were no hydrangeas, no perfectly trimmed hedges, just a dumpster and a stray cat. But down there, in the real world, the consequences were logical. If you don't pay the bill, the flowers don't come. If you don't feed the dog right, he gets sick. If you don't file the papers, you lose the client. For the first time in my life, the cause and effect of the world belonged to the people who created the causes, not me. I decided to venture out. I needed groceries, real food, not just crackers. The act of walking into a supermarket without a master list dictated by Mother S's dietary whims felt illicit. I pushed the cart down the aisle. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I picked up a jar of peanut butter, the chunky kind. Mother hated peanut butter. She said the smell was plebeian. I put it in the cart. I bought white bread, soft and processed, instead of the artisan multigrain loaves that cost $8. I bought a cheap bottle of wine that didn't have a cork. As I stood in the checkout line, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Chloe. Mom is crying in the kitchen. She burned the roast. Dad is shouting about the Wi-Fi being down. Please, Izzy, just come fix the router. I'll give you $50. $50. To fix the router, soothe the mother, manage the father, and likely clean the kitchen. The insult was so casual it almost didn't register. I typed the reply, my fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of boundaries. The router password is on the sticker under the device. The manual for the oven is in the bottom drawer. Good luck. I sent it. Then I blocked Chloe's number. Walking back to the apartment, the plastic bags cutting into my fingers, I felt the phantom limb of my old life aching. I wondered if the house would truly fall apart. Part of me, the part trained to be the caretaker, wanted to rush back and save them from themselves. I could picture the smoke billowing from the oven, the confusion on my father's face. But then, I breathed in the night air. It smelled of rain and exhaust and someone cooking onions in a nearby apartment. It was the smell of my own life. I unlocked my door, stepped into the quiet grey room, and locked the world out. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was waiting. It was a blank canvas. I sat at the small, wobbly table I had dragged in from the curb earlier that day, opened the jar of peanut butter, and took a spoon. I ate a spoonful right from the jar. It stuck to the roof of my mouth, thick and sweet. My phone lit up across the room, mother calling again. I looked at it. I watched the name flash, demanding, commanding, expecting. I took another bite of peanut butter. No, I whispered to the empty room. The phone stopped ringing, the screen went dark, and for the first time in 35 years, the darkness didn't feel like a shadow. It felt like a horizon. The morning sunlight hit the peeling laminate of my new kitchen counter, not with the harsh, accusatory glare that used to flood my mother's sunroom, but with a gentle, dusty warmth. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the handle of a chipped ceramic mug I had bought at a thrift store for 50 cents. It was ugly, a distinct shade of mustard yellow, but it was mine. No one had told me it didn't match the aesthetic. No one had demanded I brew a fresh pot of Earl Grey because the first one was too steep. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of walking on eggshells. It was the silence of a blank page. I took a sip of the coffee. It was instant, slightly bitter, and absolutely delicious. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Step 1. Checking the time on the stove, an archaic electric model that rattled when the oven was on, I realized I wasn't running late. For 15 years, my internal clock had been set to panic. If I wasn't moving, I was failing. Now, I had 20 minutes before I needed to leave for the interview, and I simply sat on a wobbly stool and watched a spider weave a web in the corner of the window frame. I didn't reach for a broom. I let it be. My phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with Mother. The cortisol spike was instant, a chemical reflex honed over decades. My hands shook as I reached out, hovering over the decline button. My thumb pressed it. I flipped the phone face down. The shaking didn't stop immediately, but a new sensation trickled in behind the fear, pride. I left the apartment, locking the door with a satisfying click. The job interview was at Greenhaven, a boutique nursery and landscape architecture firm on the other side of town. The air inside the greenhouse smelled of damp earth, peat moss, and humid ambition. It was a scent that usually triggered memories of my mother demanding I resort the entire lawn in July, but today, stripped of the coercion, it smelled like life. Isabella? I turned to see a woman in her 50s wiping soil from her hands onto a canvas apron. Her eyes were crinkled at the corners, kind but sharp. This was Elena, the owner. Yes, hello, I said, extending a hand. Thank you for seeing me. Your resume is unusual, Elena said, gesturing for me to walk with her down an aisle of hydrangeas. You list family business manager for 12 years, but there's no contact reference. It was an informal arrangement, I said, keeping my voice steady, rehearsed. I manage the accounts, the property maintenance, the scheduling, and the staff, but I'm looking for a position with structural clarity and a paycheck. Elena stopped and looked at me. She picked a dead leaf off a fern. We have an opening for an inventory coordinator and junior design assistant. It pays $22 an hour to start. Health benefits after 90 days. Is that below your expectation? I blinked. 22 an hour. For doing things I had done for free while being told I was worthless, I had to physically swallow the lump in my throat. That sounds reasonable, I managed to say. Can you start Monday? I can start now. Elena laughed. A genuine, throaty sound. Monday is fine. Take the weekend. Breathe. Walking out of that nursery, I felt lightheaded. I sat in my beat-up sedan in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel. I had a job, a real job, one where my labor was a transaction, not a tithe paid to an emotional terrorist. By Wednesday, the rhythm of the work had begun to settle into my bones. It was physically demanding, hauling crates of perennials, organizing the chaotic back-office files, but the clarity of it was intoxicating. I organized the invoices by date and vendor, creating a color-coded system. You're a wizard, Julian, a college student who worked the register said as he leaned over the desk. Elena's been trying to sort those receipts since 2019. It's just logic, I muttered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I wasn't used to praise. Praise in my old house was a trap, a prelude to a bigger request. Nah, it's skill, Julian said, taking a bite of an apple. Hey, you want to grab lunch with the crew? We're going to the taco truck. I brought a sandwich. So? Eat it at the truck. Come on, Isabella. We don't bite. I went. I sat on a curb with 3 other people who didn't know my last name, didn't know about my sister's golden status, and didn't care about the dust on my shoes. We talked about movies. We talked about the weird customer who tried to return a dead cactus. I laughed, and the sound felt foreign in my chest, rusty and jagged, but real. That evening, I drove to the community college. This was the terrifying part. This was the selfish part, as my mother would have phrased it. I walked into the fluorescent-lit hallway of the continuing education building. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Room 304. Introduction to Business Management. I sat in the second row. I opened a fresh notebook. The spine cracked. A crisp, virgin sound. I wrote the date at the top of the page. September 14th. Is this seat taken? I looked up. A woman about my age, wearing scrubs and looking exhausted, gestured to the chair next to me. No, go ahead. She sat down and sighed. I haven't been in a classroom in 15 years. I feel like I'm going to throw up. Me too, I confessed. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm not allowed to be here. She smiled sideways at me. I'm Sarah. Isabella. Well, Isabella, we're here. Might as well learn something. As the professor began to speak about organizational structures and resource allocation, my pen flew across the page. Every concept he introduced, opportunity cost, sunk cost fallacy, hit me with the force of a revelation. I wasn't just learning business. I was learning the vocabulary of my own exploitation. My mother had banked on my sunk cost fallacy. The years I already invested to keep me trapped. The lecture ended at 9. My phone had been vibrating in my pocket for the last hour. I walked out to the parking lot, the cool night air hitting my face. I pulled the phone out. 7 missed calls. 4 from my mother, 3 from my sister Clara, and a text from Clara. Mom is freaking out. The caterers need the deposit for the gala and no one knows the password for the business account. Pick up. I stared at the screen. The old Isabella would have panicked. I would have texted back the password immediately, apologizing for the delay, offering to call the bank myself. I would have fixed it to stop the noise. But I was standing in a college parking lot. I had a job where I was a wizard. I had a friend named Sarah. I dialed Clara. She answered on the first ring. Finally! Where the hell are you? Mom is tearing the house apart. The caterer is on the other line threatening to cancel the booking for the charity dinner. Hello, Clara, I said, leaning against my car door. Don't hello, Clara me, the password, now. I don't work there anymore, I said. My voice sounded thin to my own ears, but the words were solid. What are you talking about? Stop being dramatic. Mom is losing her mind. She can't find the vendor list, the dog has a rash, and the house is a pigsty because the cleaner quit. You need to come over this weekend and sort this out. I can't, I said. Can't? Why? Do you have a date or something? She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. No, I have a life. Isabella, stop it. Just give me the password. It's in the red binder, I said. The one I made for Mom 3 years ago. The one she used as a coaster for her martini glasses. It's on the second shelf in the study. I'm not looking through a binder. Just tell me. No. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Excuse me? I said no. You're the Vice President of Operations, aren't you? That's what your title says on the website. I'm sure you can figure out a bank login. You're being incredibly selfish, Clara spat, after everything Mom has done for you. Goodbye, Clara. I hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys on the asphalt. I crouched down to pick them up, gasping for air. The guilt was a physical wave, nauseating and cold. They need me. I'm hurting them. I'm ungrateful. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. In, out. I remembered the inventory list at the nursery. I remembered Elena's handshake. I remembered the concept of opportunity cost. The cost of helping them was me. It was my life. I stood up, gripping the keys until the metal bit into my palm. I wasn't going back. The cord was cut. Driving home, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. I stopped at the 24-hour grocery store. I walked down the aisles, dazed. I bought a bottle of wine. Not the cheap stuff my mother made me buy for myself, but a nice Pinot Noir. I bought a frozen pizza. I bought a small potted succulent near the checkout counter. Back in my apartment, I placed the succulent on the windowsill next to the spider web. Welcome home, I whispered to the plant. I sat on the floor, eating pizza and drinking wine out of my mustard yellow mug because I didn't own wine glasses yet. The phone lay on the counter, silent now. I had put it on Do Not Disturb. I opened my textbook to the first chapter. The words blurred slightly, but I blinked them into focus. I read until my eyes burned. I read until the guilt in my stomach was replaced by the dull ache of exhaustion. For the first time in 35 years, I was tired because of what I had done for myself. It was a good tired. It was a clean tired. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The streetlights outside cast long rectangular shadows across the floor. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I was alone, and for the first time, being alone didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a beginning. The soil was turned. The seeds were sown. Now I just had to wait for the rain. The vibration of my phone against the reclaimed wood of my new coffee table felt like a seismic tremor. A miniature earthquake threatening to shatter the fragile piece I had spent the last month constructing. It was a Sunday morning, and the sunlight streaming through the window of my studio apartment didn't illuminate dust bunnies or piles of unfiled invoices. It lit up a small thriving pothos plant and a stack of textbooks on art history. My choice, my passion, my tuition paid for with money I had finally stopped handing over to the family pot. But the phone kept buzzing. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. The pattern was distinctive. 3 short bursts, a pause, then a long relentless ring. My mother. For weeks I had managed to keep the barrier up. I had treated my departure like a surgical amputation, painful, bloody, but necessary to stop the rot from spreading to the rest of my soul. But today, the sheer volume of notifications breached the dam. Curiosity, that treacherous old friend, mixed with a lingering, conditioned sense of duty, forced my hand. I picked up the device, my thumb hovering over the notifications tab. 32 missed calls, 14 voicemails, a deluge of text messages that transformed from commands to pleas, and finally, to vitriol. I sat back in my thrifted armchair, the velvet worn smooth under my fingertips, and decided to listen. Not to respond, but to witness. I needed to know if the silence I felt was real, or if I was simply holding my breath. I pressed play on the first voicemail, dated 3 days ago. "Isabella!" My mother's voice was sharp, clipping the vowels. "The supplier for the boutique called. They're saying the spring order wasn't finalized. I told Chloe to handle it, but she says you never left the login codes. Call me back immediately. This is childish." I took a sip of my tea, Earl Grey, hot and bergamot scented. I had left the codes. I had written them in the black binder labeled Operations that I had placed directly in Chloe's hands before I walked out. I skipped ahead 2 days. The tone had shifted. The background noise in the message was chaotic. The distinct, high-pitched yapping of the Pomeranians, usually my charge, echoing in the tiled hallway of my parents' house. "The house is a pigsty, Isabella," she snapped, though there was a tremor of panic beneath the rage. "The cleaning service you booked, apparently they cancelled because the card on file was declined. Since when do we use a debit card for that? And your father is asking where his blood pressure medication is. You always pick it up on Tuesdays. He's been dizzy all morning. If something happens to him, it is on your head." A cold spike of guilt tried to pierce my chest, the old programming firing up its engines. Dad is dizzy. But I breathed through it, inhaling the steam from my mug. Dad has a car, I reminded myself. Dad has a phone. Dad has a wife. The messages painted a vivid picture of a kingdom in rapid decline. The meticulous ecosystem I had maintained for 15 years, where bills were paid silently, medications appeared magically, and the garden remained an Eden of manicured blooms, was collapsing under the weight of its own incompetence. The mantra, "family works for free," had apparently expired the moment the only worker left the building. The most recent voicemail, left only 20 minutes ago, was different. It wasn't angry. It was breathless. "Pick up the phone, Bella, please. It's the business account. The bank called. There's an overdraft, a big one. Chloe said she just moved some funds around to cover her credit card, but she messed up the transfer. They're freezing the assets until we sort it. I can't deal with this. I don't know how to talk to these people. They're asking for ledgers I can't find. Just come over for an hour, just to fix the filing system." I set the phone down, the screen dark. The golden child had tarnished the gold. Chloe, who had always been praised for her vision and creative spirit, while I was dismissed as the plodder, the worker bee, had finally been asked to carry a fraction of the load. And she hadn't just stumbled, she had set the load on fire. A knock at my door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I smoothed down my oversized sweater and opened the door to find Mrs. Gable, my parents' next-door neighbor, standing in the hallway of my apartment complex. She held a Tupperware container, looking out of place in my gritty, artistic neighborhood. "Mrs. Gable," I blinked. "How did you find me?" "Your aunt told me," she said, her eyes scanning my modest living space with a mix of judgment and pity. She thrust the container at me. "Lasagna. I know you probably aren't eating well." "I'm eating fine, thank you," I said, guarding the doorway. I didn't want the scent of my old life, even the scent of basil and mozzarella, crossing this threshold. "Isabella," she lowered her voice, leaning in, "you really need to call your mother. I saw the ambulance there yesterday." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Ambulance? For Dad?" "No." Mrs. Gable shook her head, her grey curls bouncing. "For your mother. Panic attack, they said. She was screaming on the front lawn in her silk robe, Isabella. Screaming that the walls were closing in. The garden is dead, you know. Those hydrangeas you loved. Brown crisp. And Chloe... Well... Mrs. Gable pursed her lips. I saw Chloe trying to back your father's SUV out of the drive and she took out the brick mailbox. The police were involved. I stared at her, the absurdity of it warring with the horror. The mailbox? The whole thing? Rubble? Mrs. Gable looked at me expectantly. They're drowning, dear. You've made your point. Don't you think it's time to go back and steady the ship? Your mother looks 10 years older. I looked at the Tupperware in her hands, then back to her eyes. Mrs. Gable, did my mother send you? The older woman flushed pink. She mentioned you were being difficult. She's worried about your mental state, living in a place like this. I'm not coming back, I said, my voice quiet but steely. But the business is not my business, I finished. And the house is not my house. Thank you for the lasagna, but I can't take it. I closed the door, gently but firmly. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to Mrs. Gable's footsteps retreat. My heart was racing, not with the urge to run home, but with the terrifying clarity of what was happening. They weren't just struggling. They were imploding, and their only survival strategy was to cannibalize me again. The phone rang again. This time I answered. Isabella! My mother's voice was ragged, lacking its usual polished veneer. She sounded stripped raw. Mrs. Gable said she found you. She said you slammed the door in her face. Have you lost your mind? I didn't slam it, I said, walking over to the window to watch the traffic below. I just closed it. What do you want, Mother? I want you to stop this charade, she hissed. Do you know what happened to the mailbox? Do you know that the bank is threatening to audit us? Chloe is sensitive. She can't handle this kind of pressure. She's an artist, not an accountant. She's crying in her room right now because you set her up to fail. I set her up? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I left a manual. I left contact numbers. I left a solvent business and a clean house. Chloe is 32 years old. She needs support. That is what family does. Her voice rose to a shriek. You think you're so high and mighty with your little apartment and your selfishness? But look at what you're doing to us. The hydrangeas are dead, Isabella. Dead. I know, I said. Mrs. Gable told me. Then come fix it. Come back for the weekend, just the weekend. We have the charity gala next week and the house looks like a bomb went off. I can't host a committee like this. If I lose my standing with the committee, it ruins everything. There it was, the core of the wound. It wasn't about missing me. It wasn't about love. It was about the committee. It was about the optics. It was about the labor required to maintain the illusion of their perfection. No, I said. The silence on the other end was heavy, shocked. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not coming to fix the garden. I'm not coming to talk to the bank. And I'm certainly not coming to clean up Chloe's mess with the mailbox. You ungrateful little... She cut herself off, taking a ragged breath. The tactic shifted instantly from aggression to martyrdom. I gave you life. I gave you a home. I let you live here rent-free for years. I worked for that rent. I interrupted, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of speaking a truth I had swallowed for decades. I worked 80 hours a week for that rent. I managed the store. I cooked the meals. I cleaned the floors. I raised the dogs. And I managed your moods. If you calculated my hourly wage for the last 10 years, you would owe me a fortune. Consider the house sitting and the charity work my resignation notice. Isabella, please, she cracked, the desperation finally genuine. I don't know where the tax documents are. I don't know how to log into the payroll system. The employees are threatening to walk out on Monday. Without you, the business dies. Do you want that on your conscience? Your father's legacy? If the business cannot survive 2 weeks without an unpaid employee, then it wasn't a business, I said, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. It was a parasite. How dare you call us that? She whispered. I didn't call you that, I said, though the implication hung heavy in the air. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly, I'm sorry it's hard. But I'm not coming to save you. You have Chloe. You always said she was the bright one. Let her shine. She's useless, my mother screamed, the truth finally erupting out of her, a verbal explosion that must have tasted like bile. She's useless, Isabella. She can't doing anything. She just spends money and cries. I need you. The admission hung between us, vibrating in the static. For years I had waited to hear that. I had waited for the acknowledgement that I was the engine, the spine, the necessary one. But now that I had it, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. She knew, she had always known. She had simply chosen to value the ornament over the engine right up until the car stopped moving. I know, I said softly. I know she is. But you chose her, over and over again. And now you have to live with her. Isabella, don't you hang up. If you hang up, don't bother. Don't bother coming back. I finished for her. I know, that's the point. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her voice, tiny and tinny, screaming my name. A ghost trapped in a machine. I pressed the red icon. The silence that rushed back into the room was profound. My hands were shaking. I placed the phone face down on the table. I looked around my apartment. It was small. The view was of a brick alleyway. I had to pay for my own heat, my own food, my own mistakes, but the air in here was mine. I walked over to the pothos plant on the windowsill. The soil was dry. I took a glass of water and poured it slowly into the pot, watching the dark earth absorb the moisture, darkening, revitalizing. I could nurture this. I could keep this alive. Outside, the world continued. Back at the kingdom, the walls were crumbling, the lawns were dying, and the golden child was weeping over a broken mailbox. It was a disaster. It was a catastrophe. But for the first time in my life, it wasn't my emergency. I sat back down in the armchair and opened my art history textbook to chapter 5, The Renaissance. Rebirth. It seemed appropriate. I began to read, leaving the phone face down, letting the battery drain into the quiet afternoon. The morning sun hit the floorboards of my new apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden beams. For the first time in 34 years, I didn't see the dust as an indictment of my laziness or a chore screaming to be done. I saw it simply as dust. It was mine to clean or mine to leave. That realization alone, that the state of my environment was a choice rather than a mandate, tasted sweeter than the dark roast coffee steaming in the ceramic mug between my hands. I walked to the window, overlooking a city that felt vast and indifferent in the most comforting way possible. Down there, amidst the traffic and the pedestrians, I was anonymous. I wasn't Isabella the fixer or Isabella the doormat. I was just a junior project manager at a logistics firm, a woman who had just yesterday signed a lease on a place with no guest room. The vibration of my phone on the granite countertop broke the silence. It wasn't the frantic, incessant buzzing that used to dictate my heartbeat. It was a single, polite notification. An email from my boss, confirming my performance review. Exemplary organizational skills. Highly recommended for the senior track next quarter. I traced the rim of my mug, a smile touching my lips. It turned out that the skills I had honed managing a chaotic household, a failing family business, and the fragile egos of 2 narcissists were actually worth a 6-figure salary when applied in the real world. Who knew that competency, when stripped of emotional blackmail, was a currency? But the peace was fragile. Today was the day. I had agreed to meet my mother. Not at the house, I would never step foot in that mausoleum of wasted years again, but at a bistro 3 blocks from my office, neutral ground, public enough to prevent a scene, or at least to shame her into keeping her voice down. I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a tailored navy blazer and trousers that fit perfectly, bought with money I hadn't been forced to invest back into the family coffers. I looked like the woman I was becoming, not the frightened girl I had been. When I arrived at the bistro, the scent of roasted garlic and fresh bread hit me, grounding my senses. I saw her immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, and the sight of her sent a phantom jolt of adrenaline through my stomach. But as I walked closer, the fear transmuted into something colder, pity. My mother, usually impeccably groomed to the point of rigidity, looked frayed. Her hair, typically sprayed into a helmet of perfection, had a few loose strands escaping near her temples. Her blouse was wrinkled at the collar. She was checking her watch, her foot tapping a frantic rhythm against the table leg. I pulled out the chair opposite her. "Hello, Mother?" She jumped, her head snapping up. Her eyes scanned me, looking for the cracks, the regret, the disheveled failure she had predicted. When she didn't find it, her expression tightened. "Isabella," she breathed, her voice pitching into that familiar tone of wounded martyrdom. "You're late. I've been sitting here for 15 minutes. "I'm exactly on time," I said, checking my own watch. 12:30, just as we agreed. She waved a hand dismissively, the heavy gold bracelets clanking. "Semantics, look at you. You look hard." "I look healthy," I corrected, signaling the waiter. I ordered an iced tea. She hadn't ordered anything yet, likely waiting for me to manage the hospitality of the moment. I didn't. "Well?" she started, leaning in, her eyes narrowing. "Are you happy? The house is a disaster, Isabella. A complete disaster. Your father is forgetting his medication because someone isn't there to organize his pillbox. The garden is dead. The business. Let's not even talk about the accounts." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. The words were polite, but hollow. I wasn't sorry. I was validated. "Sorry?" she scoffed, a harsh sound that drew glances from the nearby tables. "You don't get to be sorry. You caused this. You abandoned us. Your sister is trying, God bless her, but she has her own life. She has her art. She can't be expected to handle the drudgery you used to do." I took a long, slow sip of my tea, letting the cold liquid numb the sudden spike of heat in my chest. "Sophie has hands, Mother. She's 31. If she can paint, she can file an invoice or scrub a toilet." "She is sensitive," my mother hissed, her facade of public decorum slipping. "She isn't built for that kind of stress. You know that. You were always the strong one, the resilient one." "The usable one," I said softly. My mother recoiled as if slapped. "How can you say that? After everything we gave you? A roof over your head? Food? Those are the legal requirements of raising a child, not a salary for 30 years of servitude," I replied, keeping my voice level, though my hands were trembling slightly beneath the table. I clenched them into fists to steady myself. "I'm not coming back, Mother. That's why I agreed to meet, to tell you to stop calling my office, stop sending flying monkeys to my apartment. It's over." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of losing a daughter. It was the panic of an employer losing their only competent, unpaid employee. "You can't be serious," she whispered, changing tactics. The anger dissolved into a cloying, manipulative sweetness. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back. "Bella, please, we can work this out. We'll pay you a stipend. We can discuss a salary for the business management." "I already have a salary," I said. "A real one, with benefits and a pension and a boss who says thank you." "But it's family," she cried out, her voice cracking. "Doesn't that mean anything to you? Family works for free because family is love. Love is an extraction, I said, the realization crystallizing into words I had needed to say for a decade. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a resource. You wanted insurance against your own incompetence. You drained my savings, you sabotaged my relationships, and you fed my future to Sophie so she could shine while I rotted in the basement office. That is a lie. Is it? I leaned forward. When was the last time you asked me how I was without following it up with a request? When was the last time you celebrated a birthday of mine without making me bake the cake and clean up the wrapping paper? She fell silent, her lips pressing into a thin, pale line. She couldn't answer because the memory didn't exist. I have paid my dues, I continued, my voice gaining strength, echoing the steeliness I felt inside. I paid them with my 20s. I paid them with the career I delayed. I paid them with my self-esteem. The debt is settled, Mother. I don't owe you anything. Not time, not money, and certainly not guilt. The waiter arrived to ask if we wanted to order food. My mother looked at him blankly, her world tilting on its axis. No, thank you, I told the waiter. I'm actually leaving. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill. I placed it on the table, anchoring it under the sweating glass of iced tea. What are you doing? She asked, her voice small, almost childlike. Paying for my drink, I said. And yours if you decide to stay. I pay my own way now. I stood up. The bistro seemed brighter than when I sat down. The air felt lighter. If you walk away now, she threatened, the venom returning as a last resort, don't expect to be in the will. Don't expect us to be there when you fail. And you will fail, Isabella. You need us. I looked down at her, really looked at her. I saw a bitter, aging woman trapped in a mess of her own making, terrified of the silence that awaited her in that big, dusty house. I don't need you, I said. And the truth of it washed over me like a baptism. And honestly, I think you'll find that without me to blame for everything, you and Sophie are going to have a very hard time tolerating each other. I turned my back on her. Isabella! She shouted, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I walked toward the glass doors, the noise of her voice fading into the background hum of the restaurant. Stepping out onto the sidewalk was a physical sensation of release. The city air smelled of exhaust and rain and possibility. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until my chest ached pleasantly. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Sarah, a colleague who had quickly become the kind of friend I was told didn't exist. One who gave as much as she took. Hey, drinks at 6 to celebrate the review. We're all proud of you. I typed back. I'll be there. I started walking, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the pavement. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward myself. The invisible ledger I had carried for so long, the one tallying every sacrifice and every unacknowledged favor, had been burned to ash. I was broke in terms of family inheritance, perhaps. But as I merged into the flow of the city, surrounded by strangers and infinite paths, I knew I was richer than I had ever been. I was free. And that was the only embracing I would ever need again.